How many of you find yourself more preoccupied and worried and anxious about the government and your relationship to the U.S. government than you've ever felt before in your lives? How many of you are spending an average of 10 minutes a day talking to your spouse's, partner's, friends about the situation? Well, I was thinking the minimum. Half an hour a day? Every night with your spouse, friend, family members? Yeah. So you are probably part of a minority group in the United States now. And if you're a Democrat or otherwise voted for Hillary Clinton or against Donald Trump, you are finding yourself in a minority position where suddenly the government's functioning could affect you in very dramatic ways and is already affecting your lives psychologically in a somewhat dramatic way. Rates of anxiety are going up, feelings of depression, hopelessness, helplessness, right? And this is probably a new feeling for a lot of you. Some of us got to experience a smidgen of this during the Nixon administration, but it's much worse now. And for those of us who are LGBT, this has been going on our entire lives. We have always been in a situation where the government's decisions are threatening our well-being. And we are always scanning the news for the latest developments in the court cases, the legislation that's being, anti-gay legislation that's being proposed and often passed. In many, many ways, we've been living in this kind of political context our entire lives. And so this sense of heightened anxiety that you've been experiencing for the past maybe year and a half, 2 years, since the election candidacy started, is giving you a taste of what we've experienced. And the threats to us, of course, have been even more severe in terms of, when I was growing up, you could be incarcerated for being gay. You could be hospitalized and lobotomized for being gay, and so on. So I just want to begin by sort of anchoring this concept of minority stress, because many of you who've never experienced it before are just starting to experience it. I'm not going to talk about everything about couples therapy of same-sex couples. Today I've written a chapter in the Clinical Handbook of Couple Therapy. In the last 3 editions or 4 editions, I've written the chapter on same-sex couples. I'm not going to try to cover that whole territory again today. I'm going to focus on just a narrow slice of it, and that has to do with coping with minority stress. So, in 1973, American Psychiatric Association declassified homosexuality as a mental illness. In 2003, it's quite a long time, that's the year the U.S. Supreme Court ruled it was unconstitutional to criminalize consensual same-sex relationships. 1 year later, the first same-sex marriages were performed in Massachusetts. So literally, there were a group of people who went from being outlaws to in-laws in the space of 12 months. In 2015, that was the year the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of marriage equality for same-sex couples in all states. So it's a pretty recent history that we've had any kind of legalization of same-sex relationships. There are still only 13 countries worldwide where marriage equality exists for same-sex couples. Next slide. U.S. Census data 2010 on same-sex couples. There are 646,000 same-sex couples households reporting in 2010. 17.8% of them are households with children. and that percent is significantly higher among couples ages 22 to 55, which makes sense. That's childbearing, child-raising years. And couples of color have a higher rate of having children. 80% is the percentage of growth in disclosure of same-sex couples households to the U.S. Census between 2000 and 2010. So I don't think the proportion of same-sex couple households is growing. It's just that same-sex couples are more willing to report that fact to the U.S. Census than they ever were before. 1.8%, that's the percentage of households in the District of Columbia that are comprised of same-sex couples. It's the highest percentage in the nation. So you see, the number of same-sex couples is still a tiny, tiny proportion of the U.S. population. What's the status of same-sex couple relationships and LGBT equal rights as of now, June 2017? Next slide. McDonald's introduces gay pride fries in rainbow boxes. It may seem like a minor thing, but I've worked 40 years to be able to buy a gay French fry. And if you want to have another experience of minority stress, go to your local McDonald's and ask for the gay French fries. See what happens to you. It is a symbol, though, how far we come to see this advertisement. Also, sort of trivializes the changes that have happened, right? Is this what it boils down to? We get to have gay French fries? I mean, let's talk about the current crop of LGBT youth coming up and what their aspirations are for parenting and marriage. So, in a study that was done just before same-sex marriage was legalized by the U.S. Supreme Court, 92% of lesbian youths and 82% of gay male youths wanted to be in a long-term monogamous relationship in 10 years. These were youths aged 15 to 22. The study was done by Tony Dalgelli at Penn State. Their marriage aspirations. 78% of lesbian youths and 61% of gay male youths said it was very or extremely likely they would marry a same-sex partner if legally possible. 66% of lesbian youths and 52% of gay male youths said it was very or extremely likely they would be raising children together in the future. So, what do LGBT people want? They want the same damn station wagon, picket fence, and French fries that everyone else has always had, right? So it turns out their aspirations are not very different from, I mean, probably the percentages are a little bit lower, but again, this was before same-sex marriage was passed, and I suspect that these percentages have gone up as the reality has set in. But we face continual uncertainty about legal and political status of LGBT equal rights, and I'll show you some sample news reports from just this month. At the top are the titles of the articles and publication venue, and then a quote from it. So same-sex parents still face legal complications is the title of the article, New York Times. Basically, the article focuses on the fact that you could have children in one state and they could be legally adopted, but if you travel in another state that doesn't have legal adoption by same-sex couples, the non-biological parent could lose custody of their child in that state. So, if my partner and I traveled to Georgia and something happened to my partner, the state of Georgia could refuse to let me take my daughter home with me. If I travel to Australia, which still doesn't have same-sex marriage, same thing could happen. So we're still vulnerable in a lot of ways when it comes to parenting rights. In addition, you could get married legally now, but you could get fired the next day from your job for being LGBT in many states, in half the states. Half the states in the United States do not have employment non-discrimination laws covering LGBT people. So that's a big disincentive to getting married. If you could be fired by your employer the next day if they found out you were married. And it literally has happened. There have been court cases, and they're all working their way through the courts now, of employees being fired because they got married to their long-term same-sex partners. Another article titled, California Attorney General adds 4 states to state travel ban. So I don't know if you know this, but there are about 100 pieces of legislation pending through the legislatures of various states right now, pushing forward what are called religious exemption laws. These are laws that permit people to deny services to LGBT people if LGBT people's lifestyles are abhorrent to their religious beliefs. In other words, you can be denied employment, promotion, housing, and accommodations, and credit in these states if your religious beliefs condemn homosexuality. So, and again, most of these laws are under consideration in the half of the states that don't have employment non-discrimination laws. The question is, how far will they go along these lines? It's one thing to say that churches have a right to hire people who work in theological positions, have a right to hire people who uphold those theological positions. It's another thing to say, if you're a certain kind of religious physician, you can refuse to treat an LGBT patient in the emergency room because you don't approve of your religion doesn't approve of their lifestyle. So can you deny medical care to LGBT people because your religion abhors LGBT people? Well, so the states that have been condemned, that have been banned by California, by travel ban, they mean the state of California won't do business in those states. Alabama, Kentucky, South Dakota, Texas, Kansas, Mississippi, North Carolina, and Tennessee. And Georgia may be next, because there's laws in Georgia around religious exemption. Here's another news story just this last week. Court upholds firing of Richmond police clerk for anti-gay behavior. So basically a supervisor in a police facility had an intern and didn't allow her intern to enter secured areas, an LGBT intern, didn't allow her LGBT intern to enter secured areas of the building. And the supervisor made the intern wait in the lobby and acted as if she wasn't there. A colleague quoted the supervisor saying, "The intern won't be going to heaven because God doesn't like gays," and blamed the police chief for cultivating a gay environment. So, in this case, the court upheld the firing of this supervisor, but the fact that this kind of discrimination is still occurring is not uncommon, and I mean, you don't probably notice these stories in the news the way I would, but every week at least there's something like this going on and reported in the newspapers. Gay rights rulings in Taiwan and Hong Kong may sway the mainland. Well, Taiwan's highest court ordered its parliament to enact a law giving gay couples the right to marry within the next 2 years. That's quite an accomplishment. I mean, it's a huge change for Asia. Hong Kong's top court ruled that the government could not deny benefits to the partner of a gay official, and those partners had been married in New Zealand previously. The same article also reports, though, that a Peking University study reported that attitudes towards LGBT people in China, only 5% of LGBT people said they had come out at work. Only 5%. Less than 15% had come out to their families. So the situation is still quite dire in other parts of the world. In Russia, you know, has a gay propaganda law. I don't know if you know about it. It's called a law against the promotion of homosexuality. And the way it's written, citizens in Russia are not allowed to say anything positive about homosexuality. And if they do, they can be imprisoned. But in fact, the law is used routinely to cover for police abuse of LGBT people and violence towards LGBT people, because their very existence suggests they're speaking publicly in favor of homosexuality. So I give you those examples just to tell you that the amount of discrimination that's going on towards LGBT people is still quite intense and quite ubiquitous, probably much more than most of you notice. But the feeling in our community is that we're under constant siege by the larger community, and we have to constantly be vigilant for our rights lest they be taken away. So what I've been thinking about lately, and really is part of the future of treatment of LGBT couples, is for therapists and clients to look at together how this kind of discrimination and minority stress impacts the couple's functioning in their mental health. And equally importantly, how do patterns of coping with incidents of discrimination, how does coping serve as a moderator between LGBT stress on the one hand and couple mental health on the other? So I'll show you a couple of studies that we've done. We did a study of predictors of marriage among registered domestic partners in California. This was done in 2008. We had 976 same-sex couples who had registered as domestic partners. About half were female, half male. Surveyed in 2008 before same-sex marriage was legalized, and again 5 years later in 2013, after the U.S. Supreme Court had struck down Proposition 8 and same-sex marriage was legalized in California. The research question was, what are the time one predictors of couples getting married, staying together unmarried, or breaking up by time two? I hope everyone's following this. At time two, they were legally able to get married. And so we're looking at what at time one in 2008 predicted them getting married or not by 2013. And we did a discriminant function analysis to produce two functions, the first of which contained these ones that are these scales that are highlighted in blue. Predictors of getting married were relationship satisfaction, amount of nurturance received, conflicts avoidance received, was negatively associated, jealousy received, anger, aggression received, depression were all negatively associated on discriminant function 1. So in other words, those were the predictors of, the ones that are highlighted in blue, were the discriminant function 1 predictors of getting married. And discriminant function 2, the predictor of not getting married, was internalized homophobia. So I'm telling you about this because it illustrates that for a same-sex couple to get married seems to require not only getting along well, but also having overcome the stigmatization that goes along with being LGBT. Let me show you the scatter plot here. Here's the scatter plot. Yeah, good. So you can see those who got married are higher in discriminant function 1. Those are the relationship quality. And they also were mid-range in internalized homophobia between those who broke up, who had the highest amount of internalized homophobia, and those who remained domestic partners. The implication of this is that even with same-sex marriage being available, those who have higher internalized homophobia are unable to take advantage of that legal status, or less able to take advantage of that legal status. Study number 2, gay male couples whose children ages 3 through 10 were conceived via surrogacy and raised by the gay male partners. 68 gay father families, half of the children were female and half were male. We looked at a bunch of different variables. I'll show you the tables. So the correlates, significant correlates of couple relationship satisfaction for 68 gay male couples with children via surrogacy. So total social support from family and friends correlated Spearman Rowe 0.279 with couple relationship satisfaction, and social acceptance for being gay correlated 0.276. A low but significant correlation. Correlations of external stressors and supports for positive co-parenting by gay male couples. So in other words, how did these external stressors and supports correlate with positive co-parenting scores? So social support from friends correlated positively, 0.36. Anti-gay microaggressions correlated negatively, minus 0.30. Social acceptance for being gay correlated 0.30, and outness correlated 0.28. Of most interest is the anti-gay microaggressions, that is, the father's reports of how many microaggressions they experienced for being gay fathers, correlated with poorer co-parenting. Here's a list of the types of personal stressors that LGBT people have reported experiencing. Family of origin rejection for being LGB, family unwilling to accept same-sex partner, hiding sexual orientation from family and friends, verbal harassment, physical violence, physical fear, lack of societal acceptance and legal protections, unequal treatment, discrimination at work, discrimination in other settings, housing, healthcare, courts, hotels, restaurants, religious institutions, etc. Constantly having to think about avoiding HIV, this was for the gay male participants. Internal conflict about one's sexual orientation, for example, reconciling one's sexuality and one's religious beliefs. Types of political stressors for LGBT people, anger and fear regarding the religious right wing, divisions within the LGBT community based on sexism, racism, and different ideas about political strategies, loss of faith that the world is good, fair, and moral, lack of family support in fighting an anti-gay amendment, and increased shame and negative feelings about being LGBT. So what's interesting is that the anti-gay amendments that have appeared in the legislatures have an effect on LGBT people of increasing both their anxiety and their depression. And that was reported in a study by Rostowski and all. We did a study, we interviewed youths about how they coped with specific instances of discrimination in their environments. And here's what they reported was helpful to them. Confronting the perpetrator of the anti-LGBT incident, activism on behalf of LGBT rights and equality, engaging in distracting activities, sports, music, LGBT media, seeking emotional support from partner or LGBT friends, seeking intervention from external authority. And there were other strategies related to thoughts and feelings. Suppression of immediate emotional reaction to anti-LGBT incident in a new situation, analysis of anti-LGBT incident for personal relevance, discounting the source, attributing the incident to ignorance, and telling oneself that the situation is temporary and will get better. So in other words, LGBT people develop ways to counteract the discrimination they face. And to the extent that they can successfully counteract that discrimination in their own minds or by handling their own emotions or by dealing interactionally with the problem, they're less likely to experience mental health problems. In therapy, the kind of methods we use are first encouraging cultural resistance. That is, challenging in your mind all the negative things you've been taught about being LGBT. So for clients who report with some degree of internalized homophobia, we try to get them to dispute and challenge those irrational ideas. Second thing that we do, and this is extremely important, we call it cultural subversion. These are actually from feminist therapy lingo, is working for social change. So one of the things we found, and we found in some of our research studies as well, that LGBT people who are involved in political activism report less depression and anxiety than those who are uninvolved in political activism. So it helps to encourage your clients to get involved in some kind of social change efforts at whatever level they can. We encourage people to select affirmative environments, maximizing time in social spaces where couple and family can be out, and leaving anti-gay environments that are intractable and may never change. And then there's also the issue of resolving differences in partners' preferred coping strategies in response to personal and political discrimination. Because often spouses, partners have different levels of comfort with being out, or being out in different ways. So some concluding cautions for clinicians. Many of the problems of same-sex couples are not related to being LGBT. Most same-sex couples are functioning and coping well without therapy. Having said that, when they go for therapy, the therapist faces the twin dangers of case formulations that either over-attribute or under-attribute the problems to the clients being LGBT. And there's no hard and fast rule for how you make the determination. But I just want to caution you, don't assume that just because it's the same-sex couple, they're necessarily having serious problems related to being LGBT. They may not be having problems related to that. They could be having ordinary attachment problems, ordinary conflict resolution problems, and so on. For the future, I think the future for helping same-sex couples is really going to be in-person and online psychoeducational groups for same-sex couples as an adjunctive treatment to therapy. And probably online is the way to go, because that makes the treatments much more accessible, much more affordable. And what I would say is, you can use a lot of the existing relationship education models for helping same-sex couples through psychoeducational programs. PrEP, Hold Me Tight, and other kinds of psychoeducational interventions can be used with same-sex couples very effectively. But for a significant proportion of couples, they will not be sufficient, because that group of couples is also dealing with a heavy load of anxiety or depression related to LGBT discrimination, internalized homophobia, and such. And so for that portion, they definitely need some other component besides the usual PrEP or Hold Me Tight interventions. And I think the field would benefit by the development of some online psychoeducational component that could be delivered easily. It should take this online component should take a social justice perspective similar to the one presented in Ray Almeida's cultural context model, if you're familiar with that. If not, you can get a copy of my slides, and all the references are listed there. It should be supplemented with material on LGBT minority stress and coping, teaching them about how the way they handle stress affects their own mental health and their couple relationships, and teaching them new ways of handling discrimination and stressful experiences. And this part of it can be almost akin to like consciousness raising groups. Like in the early part of the women's movement, almost all the women I knew were involved in consciousness raising groups. And we need something like this for the LGBT population. If you're interested in pursuing this idea, There's a great self-help book that was written in 2015 called Happy Together, Thriving as a Same-Sex Couple in Your Family, Workplace, and Community by Sharon Rostowski and Ellen Riggle. And it would be a great source of ideas for developing an online psychoeducational program. So I encourage you all to get a copy of that book and read it and sign it to your clients, because I think it's a really terrific book. And on that note, I will end, and I'll give you a copy of my slides if you request them.